We're going to talk about the new dietary guidelines today. I don't know if any of you saw my post in the discussion area, um, but yeah, it's all the news in the nutrition world right now. And people are getting all bent out of shape um, over what the new guidelines are, as they do every 5 years, right? So dietary guidelines DGA, Dietary Guidelines for Americans, are updated every 5 years since the beginning of 1950s probably. They've been out there for a long time. Every time they come out, anytime there's any little tweak to it, everybody gets all in an uproar. Some love the new change, some hate the new change, and I just thought that I would walk everybody through what these guidelines are. They're actually not that different. There's one big difference, but the other ones are kind of nuances. And I think when I walk you guys through these, I think you're gonna go, well, no, duh. Isn't this what we're supposed to be eating anyway? Isn't that what we've been talking about? Like it's basically the core of the mental fitness diet. Um, and I'll talk you through some of that. So let me see here. What should I share first? Well, let's just go here. I'll share this one. All right, you guys should be able to see the DGA guideline up on the screen right now. So, let's just go through. So I thought it was cute that they upended the dietary pyramid by turning it upside down. So now it's an inverted pyramid, right? That's great, I guess, but it didn't really upend much of anything, except for this, which is everybody's all in an uproar about, is that they're recommending more red meat. RFK said something just dumb, as he typically does, in his press conference, which was, "We're ending the war on saturated fat." But if you actually read the guidelines, the saturated fat recommendation hasn't changed from what it's been for the last 20 years. And that's a good thing. And we're actually going to have a discussion a little bit about saturated fat versus unsaturated fat. And we're going to talk about seed oils, if you guys want to. Can be a controversial topic. But they're recommending eating more animal foods, right? More beef, more whole fat dairy. I've been recommending whole fat dairy since I've been talking about nutrition, because there's some really good evidence there. So let's go through. Put your questions in the chat as we go through, and we can unmute and chit chat as we go through here. So we do need to change our nutrition in this country. We eat too much processed food. We eat not enough vegetables, and you guys have heard me say 1,000 times. If we could change those two things, we would solve a lot of the diabetes, a lot of the obesity, a lot of the heart disease, a lot of the cancer, a lot of our chronic modern diseases can be solved with those two changes: eating fewer processed foods and more whole foods, primarily more fruits and vegetables. But then you get people in their camps. You get the camp of people saying we should only be eating fruits and vegetables, and you get the camp of people saying that processed foods are poison and we should never ever eat them, right? And that's not helpful, because it's not real life for people. So most of these recommendations are actually pretty prudent. So we'll just go through each of them. Eat the right amount for you, right? Don't overeat. Don't eat too much. Eat the right amount of calories. Bigger people need more calories. Smaller people need fewer calories. People who exercise more, athletes, for example, need more calories. People who are couch potatoes need less calories, right? That's one of those, like, no duh kinds of moments, right? Prioritize protein foods at every meal. I wish there were more guidance in this document about spacing your protein, because right now protein in the world, especially on social media, is just, it's ridiculous how many people are like protein maxing, and you get all these bros and whatever the female version of bros are, online, saying like, "Oh, here's how I make my 100 gram of protein smoothie, and here's 100 gram of protein meal that you can have." That's dumb. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The sweet spot of how many grams of protein you're supposed to take per meal is 30 grams. It's really easy to get that, right? So when you increase your protein intake per meal, not per day, per meal. Um, right around 20, 30, 40 grams per eating occasion. Let's just call it that, right? Whether it's a snack or a meal or a smoothie or something like that. Right around 20, 30, 40 is where you see maximum protein synthesis, stimulation of muscle protein synthesis. So that's why I say 30, right? It's right in the middle of that 20, 30, 40. After you go above 40, 41 grams, 42 grams, 43 grams, you're really not getting much of anything. In terms of stimulation of muscle protein synthesis. So, the smartest way to get your protein is multiple 30-gram doses throughout the day. It's one of the reasons that I'm a huge advocate of protein supplements. I don't sell a protein supplement. I don't endorse a protein supplement. There's a bazillion of them out there on the market. They all do pretty much the same thing if you can get that 30 grams dose. So that's the target you should look for. There's all kinds of nuances then, about how it tastes. Is it plant protein or animal protein? Is it whey protein or casein or hemp or soy or chickpeas or whatever? How is it sweetened? Because protein tastes awful. All the different kinds of proteins are disgusting. They're bitter, they're organic, they're just gross, and so you have to flavor them and sweeten them. And a lot of the proteins that are out there now are sweetened with sucralose, which we know is very damaging to the gut, especially the microbiome. And so you want to avoid that. And so now you're stuck with, okay, if I want to get this 30 grams of protein from whatever source, how do I tolerate the taste of it? What should I sweeten it with? Should I sweeten it with stevia? Some people like that, some people don't. Like for me, stevia gives a really pronounced bitter aftertaste. Still, that's the sweetener that I typically choose if I have the opportunity to choose it. Um, Sometimes we'll sweeten with sugar when we're formulating protein powders because it tastes so much better. And actually, the combination of 30 grams of protein with a little bit of sugar, 3 grams, 5 grams, maybe up to 10 grams, depending on what else is in there. Is there a little bit of fat? Is there a little bit of protein? That kind of stuff. That can make a very delicious tasting protein shake. But the secret isn't not getting more protein per day necessarily. It's spacing your protein out so you're getting that muscle protein synthesis maximized as many times as possible. And so breakfast is usually when most people don't get their protein, and dinner is when they do. So you probably don't need more protein at the end of your day. You probably need more protein at the beginning of your day and then spaced out through your day. So anyway, there's where all the nutrition people, in my world, nutrition people, registered dietitians, academic nutritionists, are all sort of up in arms right now, is that people are reading this and saying, oh, I should eat more steak. And what they want people to do is eat more beans, right? And I think we can have a legitimate argument about like what's the right balance of that. We'll talk more about sort of saturated fat in just a second. Um, but there any questions about protein? I see some things going to the chat. So I'm going to look in here. But if anybody wants to unmute and talk about protein before we go into some of the other stuff, we can do that.
So, Dr.
Um,
Shawn, I have a question because
yeah,
I've
yeah,
really
please.
upped my protein intake. I'm trying to get
Yeah,
between 100 and 125 grams a day, but it is
yeah.
so hard and so
It's
challenging
hard.
without adding the fat content. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. You almost can't do it unless you're doing a protein supplement, right? So like you'll see on this, I think I still have this shared. The protein serving goals are, where'd my cursor go? 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So you take a 70-kilogram person, that's going to be 70, it's going to be 80, 90 grams of protein. That's three smoothies. Um, if you want to do three smoothies, that's an easy way to do it. But when you start adding in, like, okay, here's a chicken breast, here's a hamburger patty, here's a steak, here's a salmon fillet, you're exactly right, Jazzy. Like now you're upping the fat intake, and that's the problem with the sort of like eat more meat recommendation. If people look at this and go, "Oh, I'm supposed to get more protein," another steak, please. That what they're not realizing is that that is also a really big dose of saturated fat. Well, fat in general, but saturated fat specifically. And if you're getting your protein from those kinds of foods, you're very quickly going above the saturated fat recommendation, which is still the same 10% of your total calorie intake that it's always been, right? Because that one is very closely associated with cardiovascular disease if we go much above that. Okay. Yeah, so it's tough to have this balancing act. Um, so farm salmon has killed the salmon industry as far as providing healthy salmon. Yeah, farm salmon is one of those things where like it can be good, but it's like you have to choose your farmer basically, and that's almost impossible to do. It's kind of like Julie and I are meat eaters, right? We eat a fair amount of animal protein. But we're very lucky that we're able to afford to get our meat from a local co-op, right? So all of our chicken, all of our eggs, so all of our eggs come from a local dairy. All of our milk comes from a local dairy. We have a milkman that delivers it, both of those. Our butter is the same way. Our cream is the same way. What else do we get from them? Uh, all of our meat comes from this co-op, so it's within 100-mile radius of where we live. So when we get fish, we can actually look on the package of fish and it will tell us what port, what boat, and what the captain's name was. When we get like a pork chop, when we get a steak, when we get a chicken fillet, it's all within 100 miles of, so it's Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, is where our stuff comes from. But it's freaking expensive, right? Another reason we're able to afford it is that we don't eat a ton of meat, right? We're not eating meat at every single meal, and so you're not like it's expensive per unit, but you're not eating that unit every single meal, so it sort of averages out. Um, so anyway, there's that. What was I saying about that? Oh, what I was starting to say about that is that if you choose farmed, like if we're going to choose meat, we want to get it from organic, free range, open pastures, like all that kind of stuff. You can't really do that sometimes if you're in a restaurant or you're in a grocery store and you're choosing your piece of salmon, right? You don't have that. Don't necessarily have the visibility that you would like to have to know exactly where it's coming from, is the point that I was trying to make. Um, Someone told me there's a new protein product that's 100 grams of protein per serving. Oh, jeepers creepers. Think about what that's doing to your gut, though, right? That's a lot of digestive stress to your digestive tract.
Hey,
Um,
Shawn, I'm going to
yeah,
add
go
to
ahead.
that. Considering that protein in digestion causes severe acidosis reaction or non-alkaline
Y-
digestive
Yes,
metabolites in the gut
yes,
and can lead you into metabolic acidosis plus, which then disrupts the gut lining from that as well as disrupt the gut
yep,
bacteria and increase protease enzyme development, which then harms the other bacteria and causes dysbiosis. To me, like that's one of my key arguments about this guideline. Without more public education, plus the fact that everybody's on this protein thing, plus the fact that specific very, as you talk about often, specific prebiotics that are not available in just regular fruits and vegetables are in grains,
yep,
the way they
yep, yep, yep.
minimize the grains. I'm like, this is setting somebody up deliberately because people reading it left to right are going to look at the sat fat and the protein first, plus his
Yes,
comment about sat
totally,
fat.
exactly.
So
Yep,
they're going to go after the bacon and the butter and the cheese, which are all increasing acidosis in the gut, which can lead to systemic acidosis. Then you have gut disruption, which makes it worse. And also, all of
yep,
these are influencing factors to endotoxemia, leading to increased LPS as well as gut
yep,
barrier integrity issues. That is
yep.
my issue
100%.
with this. Like,
Yep,
like
yep. Yeah,
people are not
and
educated enough.
yeah, exactly. And like I know you know this, but you didn't mention it in everything that you just said there. When you're eating more of those proteins, you're instead of making short chain fatty acids from the fiber because you're not getting the fiber, you're making short chain amino acids, which tend to be inflammatory. So you're not making the
Right.
anti-inflammatory short chain fatty acids. You're making the inflammatory short chain amino acids. So you've got another everything you said is correct. And then you've got this
Right.
other thing that's layering on.
And
It's
without the
just,
grains, you're actually decreasing the amount of food that gets to the short chain fatty acid producers. So you're actually decreasing the
yep.
chain fatty acid producing bacteria while you're doing this. Because I know this because I was looking at the sports studies, and I know somebody locally who used to be a competitive bodybuilder. He's much older now, and he's a medical doctor. And he came to me because he suddenly has severe metabolic disease, right? Diabetes and
Yeah.
everything, but he's been healthy all of his life before this. And I found all the articles on the increase of proteolytic bacteria that's caused from eating too much protein. And he was like 100 grams per day protein guy because he was a bodybuilder for
Hmm.
10 or 15 years
Yeah.
competitively. And he didn't eat the right fibers. He had basically a keto diet while competing, and he didn't know to not have, or he didn't know that he needed grains and other things. He needed to balance and take breaks from the high protein. And now he's a textbook example. When I showed him the clinical paper, he was like, that's what I ate for
Yeah.
20 years or so.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
diabetic,
Exactly.
you know?
Yep.
So
Yeah.
anyway,
Now, and a lot of those bodybuilders end up becoming diabetic when they stop competing.
oh,
Yeah,
wow.
that's a very
I didn't know
common
that.
thing. Yep. Yeah. It's crazy, and part of it is because some of them, depending on when they sort of came up in the bodybuilding world, um, insulin like there's anabolic steroid
Right, right, right.
injections and things like that, but
He didn't
insulin
do that.
injections were really really popular for a
Yeah.
while
And
to
he didn't
really
even
like.
do that. He even mentioned that. He knew about that with the other guys, but he was like, I didn't even do any of that, and I'm still diabetic now. And he has completely uncontrollable sugars now.
Ugh, that's
Yeah, and it's
crazy.
all gut related because he
Yeah.
does also have other symptoms of gut integrity issues from that. And I was trying to explain that to him, and now he doesn't want to do all the steps, obviously. But, of course, there's things you can do, but it's a lot more work now. So,
Yeah.
and this is
Yeah.
what people don't realize. And again, he's a medical doctor. His kids are going to school for medicine, and he didn't know any
Crazy.
of this.
Uh, well, let me jump back into here. I'm just going to say one more thing about protein then is in that there's a couple things I like about what's on the screen right now, right? Prioritize high quality, nutrient dense protein foods as part of a healthy dietary pattern. Good. Consume a variety of protein foods from animal sources, including eggs, good, poultry, good, all that's good, as well as a variety of plant source protein foods. So like what they're saying here is good. Like what's written here is terrific, right? We would love for people to do that. I'd love the little picture that they put here, right? They didn't put a T-bone steak, they put a shish kebab that has meat and vegetables in it. Good, right? All that's good. But then, you go out there in the world and, people are getting ribeyes. So that's probably not what the takeaway should be of this. Dairy. A lot of people are pushing back on the dairy recommendations, right? Which I think they made the right call on dairy. I've been an advocate of full fat dairy for as long as I can remember. I don't drink a glass of milk, right? I don't do something like that. But I use full fat dairy in my smoothies. I have a splash of full fat dairy in my coffee. When we serve yogurt here at Three Waves Bed and Breakfast, we serve full fat Greek yogurt. So there's no sugar there. It's a good dose of protein, but it's also a good dose of fat. They don't get into this here because this is getting a little bit into the weeds. The reason that dairy is different than so dairy is also saturated fat, but it's a different kind of saturated fat than what you find in beef. And I'm gonna see if I can drag over this little graphic. Okay, now can you guys see that now? That little graphic that I just dragged over? I'll make it bigger. Okay, so they're both saturated beef and dairy products, basically full fat milk, full fat yogurt, full fat cheese, um, are predominant sources of saturated fat in the diet. But they're different kinds of saturated fat. So the beef is a long chain saturated fat, and what you see in dairy products are a medium or a short chain saturated fat. they're both saturated, meaning just it refers to the molecular structure of the side chain. Like a fully hydrated side chain is a saturated fat. It just has to do with how it packs into cell membranes and things like that. But when we think of it from an inflammatory perspective, and this is a little reductionist, I'm going to make a point about what does being inflammatory versus anti-inflammatory really mean. We shouldn't talk about inflammatory foods and anti-inflammatory foods. We really should talk about inflammatory diets and anti-inflammatory diets, because you can have something that you can have an ingredient that's quote unquote inflammatory, and you can add another ingredient to it that is anti-inflammatory, and they honestly cancel each other out. That's one of the reasons, like I pointed out, that shish kebab, you could have and I'm going to say this for effect. I don't really believe this, but you could have an inflammatory cube of beef and an anti-inflammatory slice of pepper, and uh, they're in the same shish kebab, and in a sense, they cancel each other out from an inflammatory perspective. In a sense, we're gonna dig into that a little bit more. So anyway, going back to this, you can see how the long chain saturated fats have a completely different metabolic fate compared to the medium chain or the short chain saturated fats. These ones activate these TLRs, toll-like receptors. This is like your immune system is reacting to them as if they're an infection. Okay, so that tells you something right at the beginning. Um, Lipid intermediates accumulation. This is what leads to heart disease, because this eventually will be an atherosclerotic plaque. They increase free radicals, reactive oxygen species production, and they activate a variety of these inflammatory pathways. So when somebody says that something is inflammatory, this is what they really should be talking about. Most people who say that don't understand these inflammatory enzyme systems, but this is what's going on. This is what actually makes them inflammatory. It stimulates the production, or stimulates the activity of these inflammatory pathways. Whereas you can see on this side, they're less so. I wouldn't necessarily say they're anti-inflammatory, but they're just not inflammatory in the same way that long chain saturated fats are. So when people say there's like saturated fats are good or bad, that's a gross oversimplification, right? They're good and bad, depending on where you're getting them from. One of the reasons that a food like this, though, a food now, so not just talking about just the saturated fatty acids that are there, but the food is going to be a little bit different. Let me minimize this. Let me see if I can find this other one. Is because of, oh, I wonder if I didn't save it. Um, Dairy products, one of the reasons that I like them is that they can have other fatty acids in there. Like one is called CLA, conjugated linoleic acid. That is anti-inflammatory. That can help with blood sugar balance. I think one of the nuances, one of the biochemical nuances that everybody who gets up on their soapbox forgets about, and they talk about seed oils are bad, saturated fats are bad or good, depending on who's saying it. One is inflammatory, one is not. One is anti-inflammatory. They forget about the dynamic of fatty acids along with carbohydrates. If you're eating a diet that is high in refined carbohydrates, that's bad. If you're eating a diet that is high in long chain saturated fats, that is bad. If you're doing both of those things simultaneously, you're eating lots of steaks and or red meat in general. I would put, bacon, hot dogs, lunch meats, all that kind of stuff in there. You're eating that kind of protein, and you're eating a lot of processed carbohydrates. That's the kiss of death right there. Like literally is the kiss of death. That is the thing that is rapidly going to increase your risk for cancer, your risk for diabetes, your risk for heart disease. It really is like an unholy combination of badness in terms of how it works biochemically in the body, right? So you get people who fall into their camps and say it's the processed sugar that's bad, it's the processed or it's the saturated fat meats that are bad. They both can be bad on their own in certain ways, but when you put them together, and when we put them together, what is that? That's the standard American diet. That's what really, really needs to change. So I love that people are having this conversation, but I think it's a lot more nuanced than sometimes we hear in the media. Okay. So let me see what else I have here. Uh, okay. There is really good data to show a couple of things. So I'm going to share this guy with you. Okay. So this one is showing change in total mortality, right? Dying of things, dying of diabetes, heart disease, cancer. And it's grading the calories from specific types of fat. So these are data we've known about for a long, long time. This is where the original bunch of years of the dietary guidelines have been developed. So this trans fat increase health problems in so many ways, so significantly that they've actually been taken out of the food supply. They've been banned, which is fantastic. Next on that, so these aren't really part of our food supply anymore. Thank goodness. Where did we get most of these? You guys remember where all these were? They were in processed foods, right? That's where trans fats were mostly used in like like baked goods to make sure that they stayed crispy and crunchy and things like that. And so those are gone, which is nice. Next on the list would be saturated fats, which we just talked about a little bit. There's a difference between. I don't like that this is grouped like this for the reasons that I just said. Butter is different than cheese, is different than milk. Like dairy fats are a whole different animal. Ha ha ha! I didn't mean to do that. Than steaks are. But there's really good data to show that on total, if you have more than 10% of your calories coming in from saturated fats, that is a big red flag for future heart disease and future cancer and all those sorts of things. So it's led people to say like, well, let's get our fats from these other sources, these less saturated sources, monounsaturated sources like olive oil and avocados and seeds and nuts, and polyunsaturated sources like walnuts and seed oils, right? So this is where people also get very bent out of shape. These are highly associated with a lower risk of heart disease compared to a high intake of saturated fats. But now, why are people all up in arms about seed oils? Does anybody want to share like what you've heard and what you think and um, like what your overall perspective is on seed oils? If you look at just this, you're going to look at it and go, "Oh yeah, of course, we should eat less meat, and we should eat more seed oils, and that's going to be really good for our heart health, right?" Not so fast, actually. Does anyone know why? I'm just looking in the chat. I moved the chat down here, so this is why I'm looking at this part of my screens now. Sourcing. Seed oils linked to cancer. High heat processing in seed oils makes them toxic. Yes. Do you know how, Patricia? What high heat does to seed oils or any polyunsaturated fat? And rancid. Yes, it oxidizes them, right? So these unsaturated fats are fluid, but the structure of them, right? Because they're not saturated, they're easily oxidized, and so this is why when they heat up, when they stay on the shelf for a long time, when they're around, they're highly susceptible to oxidation. When we eat those oxidized oils, it sets off an oxidation reaction in our bodies. So eating an oxidized oil is going to cause us to become oxidized. That can lead to cancer. It can lead to cellular damage. It can lead to atherosclerosis. So one of the big problems isn't so much that these are good or bad. It's that they're easy to damage. And when they're damaged, they become bad for us on a biochemical basis. So that's
Hey,
that's
John.
that's one part of it. Yeah,
Sean,
go ahead.
can I add something?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, please.
years ago, when I was working with fats, believe it or not, from Duncan Hines, my own bosses even told me to watch out for oxidation. Like when we tested the fats that were used, especially the polyunsaturated fats in the frostings, he said to watch out for linolenic and linoleic acid breakdown because not only does it oxidize rapidly, it causes a
Yeah.
chain reaction that further accelerates breakdown and oxidation of the rest of the fatty acids throughout the entire oil very quickly, which is why
Yep.
industrial oils are preserved in nitrogen sealed antioxidant, no light chambers, these giant mill or not mills, the storage chambers, the towers, and we have to check them and test them before use all the time. But the problem is
Right.
the
Yep.
packed oils, because of risk of loss of money and being drilled to not waste anything, they can take it to the absolute limit of the testing when the values are just about to go bad as they're packing the retail items. So they're already at limit and they're being packed. And when you aerate, you actually increase oxidation as well, which when it's
Hmm.
going through the pipes, it's getting aerated. So by the time, even though it tested clear, by the time it gets into the bottle, it may be starting that chain rapidly already. Then it's getting shipped, and every time it's just like wine, where every time you're like moving the bottle around, you're actually causing more
Right.
oxidation
Right.
to
Right. Right.
happen, right? And then it's exposed to whatever, and it's sitting on a shelf with a 1 year, 2 year shelf life or more. So by the time you buy it, there is a risk that the oil might be bad, and it's going bad very quickly. And
Yep.
as you open it every single time, you're introducing more into that oxidation chain.
Right, right.
So
And
it
think
was
about what people
terrible.
do. They'll have a bottle of this stuff in their pantry for months, right? And they take it out and put a little in
I'm
the
guilty.
pan and cook something and stick it back in. They don't
Hey,
take it
I
out for
forget.
another month and
Yeah, I forget too. I forget to look at the shelf life.
yep.
I forget. I'm guilty of it too. But if you like, I got to stay on an olive farm in Italy once a long time ago on an invitation, and it's an organic olive farm still. And when you taste fresh pressed olive oil that they press
Yeah.
in front of you, right? When you taste that, and then you go back to the bottle, that's when you start to realize, oh my God, I am eating or like crappy olive oil, no matter how good the
Yeah.
brand is. I don't care if you're
Yep.
paying a
Yep.
hundred dollars a bottle.
Totally different. Yeah,
Yep.
totally different stuff. 100%. So and I'll just add to that. I agree with everything that you just said, Judy. What the food industry realized, right, when these recommendations started coming out, oh, less saturated fat, more monounsaturated, polyunsaturated fats, and tried to use this in making, Twinkies and Oreos and frosting and all that kind of stuff. What they realized was, you know what? We can chemically modify these guys to into trans fats by pumping hydrogen into them. We can make them less liquid. We can make them more solid. So then in fact, they behave when you're using them, when you're cooking with them or formulating with them, they behave more like saturated fats, but that trans fat is actually more damaging in the body. So that's they were not saturated fats because they started out as polyunsaturated or unsaturated fats, but they were chemically modified. So the food industry, tried to do an end around and got to do that for a couple of decades until they got banned from the food supply. So let me take this guy out of here. So here's another way of looking at the fats thing. So here's trans fat up here, really bad for your heart disease. Here's saturated fat. Here's unsaturated, and this is related to their predisposition to causing heart disease. So unsaturated vegetable oils tend to reduce heart disease compared to saturated fat. Trans fat increases it compared to saturated fat. So in some ways, you can consider saturated fat to almost be like neutral in a sense if it's below that 10% of your total calories thing, right? If you start going above that, really good, long-term population studies showing that it causes heart disease. But here's what I was saying before. We have to think about the carbohydrate intake as well, because we're not eating the saturated fat in isolation. We're eating it along with some kind of sugar. And if you're eating highly refined, highly processed starches and pure sugars, that's leading to oxidation of these saturated fats. And it's not so much the saturated fat is the problem, it's when it becomes oxidized, like our discussion that we just had about the oxidation of the unsaturated fatty acids. The advantage of whole grains is that whole grains give you the carbohydrates, but they come along with their own package of antioxidant phytochemicals. So they come along with fibers, they come along with lignins, they come along with polyphenols, they come along with all sorts of things that are anti-inflammatory. So go back to that picture of the shish kebab. You're taking a potentially inflammatory thing, that steak nugget, with a potentially anti-inflammatory thing, the slice of onion or slice of pepper or tomato or whatever it is that's on the shish kebab. It's the same kind of concept. So the grain or the carbohydrate in the grain, in a sense, is inflammatory. And you can see I'm doing that in air quotes. But it's coming along with these anti-inflammatory phytonutrients. And so there, that package of things is actually a pretty good thing. But people will see that, they'll go, oh, grains, oh, that means I can have a cupcake, or that means I can have a Wonder Bread, or you guys get the idea. So let me close that guy and see if there's any questions about that. And preservatives. Yeah, we can use that. I love this. I love the fact that they put a gut health thing in here. Hooray! Gut health is finally getting its airtime. So blah blah blah, sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, miso, high fiber foods help to support a diverse microbiome, which may be beneficial for health. Hooray! Thank you. This has never been part of the dietary guidelines before, so that's good. Eat vegetables and fruits throughout the day. Why didn't anybody talk about this? Right? When all the press conference coverage that I saw, I didn't see or hear a single person say, "Bravo! This is what we really should be focusing on." Right? Everybody said, "Oh, it's more steaks." Incorporate healthy fats. Yes. Focus on whole grains. Yes, like I just mentioned. Limit highly processed foods. If there's one thing I do agree with, with the current administration and RFK and Dr. Oz and all those folks who are in charge now, it's that they hate processed food as much as I do, and I think the fact that they're focusing on like artificial colors and things like that is the first place to focus on. That's like, come on, there's more important things to focus on than that. Um, getting artificial colors out of M&Ms and Doritos, I think is missing the point. But at least some good guidelines are now coming out. So limit your processed foods. That's good. Limit your added sugars. Uh, there was a big change in the alcoholic beverage thing, and I think Dr. Oz didn't do himself any favors by explaining why this. I don't know if anybody saw this, but he his so what the guideline used to say is they gave a number. They said, men should have no more than two alcoholic beverages, women should have no more than one. Now they're just saying consume less for better health. Um, they still have the same recommendation, no alcohol for pregnant women. But now it's just like, yeah, just watch your intake, right? So they stepped back a little bit from the harder recommendation about like the dangers of alcohol. I don't know how I feel about that. I do. We have talked about in here. If you look at the longest lived populations on the planet, Mediterranean diet, Scandinavian diet, all that kind of stuff. They do have alcohol, usually beer or wine, as a normal part of their typical intake. I think that's a little bit different than throwing back a martini or something like that. So I think that area is still a little bit up for debate. But what Oz said was he said, well, alcohol is a social lubricant, and there's a loneliness epidemic, and if we can use alcohol to help people connect more, then that's a good thing. And I was just like, oh geez. Not that I disagree, I guess, like that's more like sort of my usage of alcohol when I have a glass of wine and stuff like that. But I don't think think the point could have been made a little bit better. And that's most of that. The dietary guidelines. So I'm going to minimize that. There's a couple other things I wanted to show you though, with this whole discussion around seed oils and things like that. So it's not so much that polyunsaturated fats are bad, right? That's where we're getting most of those polyunsaturated fats from seed oils. Um, where most people get their seed oils right now isn't from using seed oils, right? It's not from buying a bottle of cottonseed oil and using in your cooking. You're getting most of your cottonseed oil and sunflower oil and safflower oil and corn oil and soybean oil, especially soybean oil. You're getting most of that from your processed foods. So if you reduce your intake of processed foods, you're automatically reducing your intake of all of these oils. And I pulled this off of somebody's blog, the Hateful Eight seed oils. Um, people who are anti seed oils will sometimes make this case, which I don't agree that seed oils are bad. They are anti-heart disease when they're compared to a diet high in beef and refined carbohydrates. But if you were to take out some of that beef and refined carbohydrates and replaced some of those calories with polyunsaturated fatty acids from seed oils, you would reduce your risk of heart disease. Like the science is unarguable. It's settled from a scientific perspective. And for someone to argue otherwise, they've not looked at the science. Um, so there's that. Here's where there's a little bit of truth in that argument that seed oils are bad. When you start taking too many of them, they can become inflammatory, right? But it's not a uh, uh, seed oils are good or bad. It's a dose is the poison sort of a thing, right? So here's the and it's related to this. It's related to the ratio of omega-6 oils to omega-3 oils. So now it gets a little more complicated. These are both unsaturated fatty acids. And so now you're getting one unsaturated. So now we're not talking about the difference between saturated fats and unsaturated fats. We're talking about two different kinds of unsaturated fats. Is that clear to everybody? Like fatty acid metabolism can get really complicated really quickly. So I shared with you like two different kinds of saturated fats, long chain, medium chain, short chain. Medium chain and short chain coming from dairy are different than the long chain saturated fats coming from beef. And now we're talking about unsaturated fats, omega 6s and omega 3s. This terminology, 6 and 3, refers to where on the chain is the non-saturated part. Is it on this part of the chain or that part of the chain? And it kind of refers to the shape that the fatty acid will make when it's in a cell membrane. So you can look at different oils and you can see their ratio. So I actually use a fair amount of grapeseed oil. It's a well, not a high. It's probably a medium high smoke point oil. So I will use well, olive oil isn't on here because it's not a seed oil. It's a fruit oil. Avocado oil is a fruit oil. There are vegetable oils that we can use that come from palm that are all like lower smoke point. So lower meaning they'll start to burn at a lower heat temperature. And so like you wouldn't want to use olive oil if you're trying to fry something, right? You can use olive oil to like saute your onions and garlic before you make a spaghetti sauce, but you wouldn't want to like fry something at high temperature because the olive oil would burn. It would become oxidized. It would lead to all the problems that we were just talking about a few minutes ago. Um, Grapeseed is a little bit higher smoke point. But look at this. It's super, super high in omega 6s. So somebody might look at this and go, oh, omega 6s are inflammatory, and omega 3s, which we very often think of as fish oils, are anti-inflammatory. That's an oversimplification. It really depends on the ratio of those two. Like how much out of balance are you? So if you go too high on omega 3s, and too high on omega 6s and too low on omega 3s, if that ratio gets really, really out of balance, you're going to start making more of these inflammatory compounds like arachidonic acid, for example. And I'm going to show you a graph of that in just a second. But these are the different oils. You can see the ratio of omega 6s to omega 3s. Canola oil, sometimes called rapeseed oil, is probably one of the best ones to use. It's really cheap. It's really widely available. Um, I use one. What is the blend? And what is it? What the heck is it called? I think it's called when I'm choosing a like a regular v- oil to use, just like have an oil around the house that I need to use for whatever. I use one called Smart Balance, and it's a blend of there's a little bit of palm oil in it, there's a little bit of canola oil in it, and I think there's a third oil. I'm actually going to pull it up real quick so I can tell you guys. Let me see. I got to move a couple windows out of the way in order for me to do this. Smart Balance oil. Blend of canola, soybean, and olive oils. I thought it had palm in there because the guy who invented it, I know the guy who invented it, is like a palm oil guy. Um, Offering omega threes and being cholesterol free with no trans fat. This has really good evidence for it that it's just like a nice clean oil. It's sort of medium of the road. It doesn't taste much of anything, So if you're going to use it for, you want just like you know, standard cooking oil, that's a really nice one to use. And it's kind of too bad. It costs like $1 more than the cheapest soybean oil that you're going to see on the shelf, but it's worth the extra buck because you're gonna keep that oil for you know a month maybe. Hopefully not 6 months for the reasons that we said before. So that's a nice one to check out. So let me get rid of this guy, and I want to show you. Which one should I show you first? This one. Let me show you this one first because I was just talking about this. This is what makes omega sixes quote unquote inflammatory. When you start getting too many omega sixes and not enough omega threes, because then you get a lot of omega sixes. And here's the example: corn oil. What a lot of the saturated fat people who say saturated fat is good for you, what they forget about is that meat, a lot of saturated fat, but also a lot of omega sixes. And so if you eat a lot of red meat, you're going to be making a lot of arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is the inflammatory precursor, if you will, right? When you're making so you're getting a lot of linoleic acid your body will convert that into arachidonic acid. Your body can convert that into these inflammatory eicosanoids, and this is what leads to quote unquote inflammation in the body. Okay, omega threes, which we primarily get from fatty fish, salmon, herring, sardines, mackerel, that kind of stuff, is high in, these are flax seeds, high in linolenic acid and EPA and DHA are the sort of like prototypical omega 3s that you're going to get from a fish oil supplement. You will convert those into anti-inflammatory compounds. So it really is if you're getting too many of these and not enough of these. And the question becomes like, what's a lot? Like, what does that ratio have to be problematic? I remember, when I was in school, we always use this idea of like, well, it should be as close to 1-to-1 as possible. That's not really, that's not probably like doable in today's world. But we know that probably like 20-to-1. Where'd my cursor go? Here it is. 20-to-1 or 30-to-1 or 40-to-1 is where we are now, right? A standard American diet, high in processed foods, is probably going to be 30-to-1 ratio of omega 3s. And so I've always been on the mind of what's the easiest way to normalize that ratio? What do you think would be the easiest way for somebody to get their omega 3 side down, and or their omega 3 side up? What would you say? Oh, so what are your thoughts on tests like from Zinzino for the ratio of omega 6 to 3 in the body? Because it isn't the ratio that's changing due to diet. Yes, 100%. So we've done studies. I did a study about 2 years ago on a fish oil, um, where we use that omega 3 test, right? You can go out and order that omega 3 test. Um, uh, and it's a great omega 3 index is something that I highly recommend people get just to see where you are. Um, And yeah, if you have too much omega-3 and not enough, too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3, your inflammatory index is gonna be much higher. So how do you change that? And you don't have to get it from Zinzino. Zinzino just white labels this test called omega-3 index. In fact, I'll pull it up for you so you guys can see it. And has anybody ever got an omega-3 index test before? There's lots of companies that do them. I'll show you the one that yeah, this is the one that we use. Omega Quant. Let me see if this pulls it up. Not Quest, not Fullscript. See, there's a zillion companies that offer it. This is the one that we use right here. And Zinzino just takes their test and just puts a Zinzino label on it. So the test is $50, $55. You can do like a, I think they probably have a test where you can get a couple of tests so you can test yourself, change your diet, and then test yourself later on and see how your numbers have changed. But this is the one that we use in our studies. It's really easy. You get it, you do a finger stick, you put it on the little card, you put the card in an envelope, you mail it back. So pretty nice little test. So yeah, you can so Judy said you can supplement. So you can either, lower your intake of processed food where most of your omega-3s are coming from, or omega-6s are coming from. Great, do that. So then that number is going to come down, and then you should eat more fatty fish to get your omega-3s up. Or the easiest way to do it is take a fish oil supplement. That's going to normalize that ratio like immediately. But certainly do the other things too. And if you do all three of them, you'll probably get your number back in the range where it needs to be very quickly. Okay, only two more graphs that I want to show you. Two more graphs and then one summary thing. So I'll put both of these over at the same time. So this is here's a nice graph looking at our increase of omega-6s over time. So here's the years, right? All of this, and so this is just this omega-6 intake is been climbing since about the 1950s, right? Significantly. Omega-6 linoleic acid coming up. Our intake of fish hasn't changed all that much. So omega-3s has stayed about the same. But the thing that's throwing the ratio off is that we're eating so many more of these omega-6s, and this is like superimposable right on another line, which would be the introduction of processed foods. So that's again, not to beat a dead horse, but that's where our seed oil intake is coming from. And here's another one looking at the one like which of the seed oils are we eating the most of? And it is far and away soybean oil. So soybeans are highly subsidized by the government. Soybean farmers like plant them like crazy because the government pays them to plant them like crazy. Most of those exports go over to China. But because of all the tariff wars and things like that, China hasn't been buying our soybeans for a while. And so that we've got to use them for something. So let's make them into oil. And that pushes the price of oil down. And if that's the cheapest oil, processed food companies are going to start using more of that. So anyway, there's a whole reason for why we're exposed to different kinds of foods. So you can see the other ones. Here's what's this one? Cottonseed. Canola I thought would be a little bit higher, but it looks like it's right around the same level. But really, this huge increase in seed oil is coming primarily from soybean. So let me get rid of that guy, and then I want to end with this, which is I said before, it's not just about soybean oil, and it's not just about beef tallow, and it's not just about protein intake, and it's not just about any of those we get very reductionist when we think about our nutrition, and sometimes that's helpful. Like in this course, we get reductionist all the time, right? We get right down to the level of specific bacteria and fiber structures and things like that, so we can understand the biochemistry. But once we understand that, then we have to sort of zoom out and say, okay, what are we going to do in terms of our eating patterns? And you definitely can identify a pro-inflammatory diet and an anti-inflammatory diet. And that's why this anti-inflammatory diet, that's like the basis of what the mental fitness diet is all about. Um, but think about this. So it's it's that this diet predominates in certain things is what makes it anti-inflammatory. This diet predominates in certain things is what makes it pro-inflammatory. It's not any one of those things on its own. Like if I were to go and take this steak and plunk it over here, that's not automatically going to make this anti-inflammatory diet an inflammatory diet, right? The any little bit of inflammation that this causes is going to be taken care of by, the omega-3s in this salmon and the polyphenols in this pepper and the really nice fiber that's in this banana, et cetera, et cetera. Likewise, you're not going to be able to take this bunch of grapes and plop it into this pro-inflammatory diet and go, okay, now we're fine, right? It's the whole context of everything that's going on, right? That's nutritional biochemistry. That's the heart of what we talk about in terms of like, biochemistry drives behavior is a big sort of, rule that we have in this course. So anyway, hopefully that helps. Are there any questions about that? I will say one more thing, if I can just get up on my soapbox for a second. The old style, I should have pulled up an old dietary pyramid, like an old one, from like back in the 80s. And it looks really, really different than the one that they just replaced. And that looks really different from the one that they just introduced. Um, and I'll say this, there's a lot of lobbying that goes into these organizations. Whether you're talking about HHS, Health and Human Services, whether you talk about USDA, Department of Agriculture. Back in the 1980s, when low fat was the thing to do, there was a lot of lobbying from the processed food industry. The cereal companies, the cookie companies, the frosting companies, like they like really, really were pushing this agenda of low fat. And if the recommendation is low fat, then like what is the alternative? High carb. Protein doesn't really change, right? Protein is, you can say eat a high protein diet, but there isn't much you can change on that parameter. So it's either higher carb, lower carb, higher fat, lower fat. Um, what we're seeing now is a lot of lobbying coming from ranchers. So people who make chickens, people who make pigs, people who make cows, dairy industry, and so you are seeing the recommendations change, right? That isn't how these recommendations should be made, right? It shouldn't come from lobbyists. It shouldn't come from, Kellogg's telling the government what people should eat because that's what we make. You should tell the people to eat more of our processed carbohydrate foods. And so we're going to demonize fat and we're going to tell people they need to eat more low fat, high carb, right? That happened. And now what we're seeing is we're seeing lobbying coming from other places that are more meat. And so I think we just need to understand that and be able to go back to the science and say, what do we really need to do? And I think what we really need to do is do a balance of these two things, right? You'll see over here the only source of meat is this fish. That's probably not the right way to go either, right? The right hand side is certainly not it's certainly not the right way to go. It's that blended approach. And so when I blend this approach and come up with something like the mental fitness diet, it's from looking at like globally, what do those traditional diets look like? So, we've talked about here before, and I write about a whole chapter of it in the book. It's the longest lived populations, and it's Scandinavian diet, Okinawan diet, Mediterranean diet, traditional African diet, traditional Native American diet. What is it that they all share across? And what does the science look like, and what does the biochemistry look like? So, um, there we go. And Judy, you've got your hand up, it looks like. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm just going to quick add something to what you said about the processed foods. Not that all processed foods are bad, but as far as the
Hmm.
oil portion goes, I'm just going to add that I wrote it in the chat, but basically, we knew that linoleic breaks down the quickest in almost every situation of the PUFAs that are used. So your soybeans, your canolas, which are the popular ones. And here's the problem. It's not just that breaking down, but in the majority of the processed foods, as you're adding it into these giant batches that are getting mixed and heated at the same time, so a lot more oxygen getting pumped into the oil that's getting mixed into the food, you're also adding antioxidants and preservatives, whether it is organic or not. So you're
Hmm.
adding an antioxidant preserved damaged fatty acid oil profile with already oxidized particles that are signaling molecules that cause inflammation, which we didn't know any of this in the science in the 80s when the preservatives and things were developed. Even the organic ones were being developed in the 90s, right? So when you're talking about this, all of the processed foods out there, if anything, are probably more dangerous because of these little components that have micro signaling molecules that are affecting and damaging. Like the preservatives can literally damage the cell walls of your microbiota. We know that
Hmm.
now. So we're causing diversity damage and we're eating these things when it's in a processed item, because I can't guarantee how quickly they got the oil in and used it in most cases, because as they started scaling larger and larger, they started buying 40,000 pounds of oil at a time. They're
Right,
not going
right.
to use up
Train
40,000
loads.
pounds.
Yeah,
Exactly. So
yeah.
please consider, like, there's a bigger, more complex picture where one of the problems with the omega 6 rise isn't just the omega 6, it's the damaged omega 6 we've been eating
Yes, yes, yeah. It's because they're
with
oxidized.
and with the
What you were saying
preservatives in it
before.
and the
Yep, yep,
antioxidants. Okay,
yep,
anyway,
yep,
that's
yep.
it.
Agreed. Yeah. So Karen put in here, the 80s weren't that long ago. Yeah, I still think in my mind the 80s were 20 years ago, right? That's not that long ago. And then you do the math and you're like, oh my gosh, am I really that old? So that's probably a good note to end on. Anyway, new dietary guidelines that, a lot of people are getting. I can stop the share. A lot of people are getting kind of up in arms in various ways, but I don't think if you look at them, in a balanced fashion, I think we're going to be okay. Eat less processed foods. Eat more if you're gonna, eat more meat products. Dairy is probably a good way to get some of that. Eat more fruits and vegetables. Take care of your microbiome. All the things that we've been talking about in here today. I think the one of the organizations I do a lot of work with, the NANP, National Association for Nutrition Professionals. It's holistic nutritionists. I think most of them are liking this because it's trying to get people to think more holistically about their nutrition. But we want to keep people from focusing, just in on, you know, this good, this bad, that kind of stuff.